Great second segment for you. I have my good friend here. He is the founder and chief editor of the Grueling Truth Sports Network, Mike Goodpaster. Mike, how you doing?
How you doing, Joe? I'm always doing great when I'm talking to Joe Spilman.
That's right. That's right. I love talking to you, Mike. Well, Mike, the reason why we have you on the show tonight is we had, I guess, a tumultuous week in college football, to say the least. We got the brand new college football playoff rankings that came out on Tuesday night. And I kind of wanted to give your expert take. I kind of wanted to get your expert take on what we saw come out and what your thoughts are moving forward in the championship weekend. So let's get right into it. Tuesday night, the college football playoff rankings came out. Of course, Georgia's still number one. Michigan, with their thumping of Ohio State, is number two. Both undefeated teams, by the way. TCU, who I believe has played a very quality schedule, is number three. And USC at 11-1 currently is fourth, followed by Ohio State and Alabama. Ohio State, of course, has one loss. Alabama has two. So before we get into the games this week, in your opinion, out of the top four teams right now, are there any teams that are safe no matter what happens this weekend?
I think Georgia's safe. I think Michigan's safe. I actually think all four teams should be safe, though, to tell you the truth. I don't think there's a fifth team that deserves it. I think when you look at Ohio State, if Michigan was to lose, you can't put Ohio State over Michigan because Michigan just beat them by 22 points. Alabama's got two losses. I think the only reason we're discussing this is because of lack of respect that the Big 12 and the Pac 12 have. TCU's an undefeated team that beat a lot of good teams. USC's only lost one game. That was to Utah by a point. Utah was a team ranked in a lot of people's top five before the year even started.
Right. So that having said, of course, our first game of playoff weekend is Utah and USC, and Utah already has a win over USC. So you believe, or do you think, if Utah is able to pull out that what I would call upset this week, do you think USC is safe with two losses over Ohio State?
No, I think they'll bump them immediately because Ohio State and Alabama give you better ratings. So they're probably going to put Ohio State in. If you get a TCU loss, you get Alabama in. And I think the thing people don't understand is this. If we had a TCU, USC, Georgia, and Michigan, to me, that Final Four is much more interesting because I haven't seen that Final Four.
Right.
I've seen the Ohio or the Alabama Ohio State shows, and that's fine when they're good enough to be there. They're not good enough to be there this year.
Oh no, I agree. So even in your opinion, and you just said that, if TCU happens to lose to Kansas State this weekend, and say in a world where USC loses to Utah, you think that they will put the College Football Playoff Committee will put a two-loss Alabama in over a USC or over a TCU?
Yeah, I think in a heartbeat they will because we saw how difficult it was for UC to get in there last year. Even though they're undefeated, they had to win against Notre Dame. If you look at the competition TCU's played, TCU's schedule, I mean, is comparable to Alabama's because I'm sorry, but when you lose games, do you really get credit if you get blown out by a team? I mean, Alabama lost to Tennessee. My question is, Tennessee lost to South Carolina. They're a two-loss team also. But how does Alabama right now sit ahead of Tennessee, a team that beat them a month ago?
No, that's a great
I mean,
question.
it's all about ratings. It's all about money.
Yeah, and really, I lost all confidence in the College Football Playoff Committee last year, as you know, Mike, and I think you are too. I am a University of Cincinnati fan, and that's a whole nother story what happened with UC and Luke Fickell this weekend, and I don't think we have enough time to get into that. But, you know, what I saw out of the College Football Playoff Committee last year was a committee that did everything that they could to keep a non-Power 5 team out of the playoffs. And I think any scenario that would have arose that they could have justified in just the littlest possible bit to keep Cincinnati out, they would have. And what I fear is that is the same position that TCU is in right now. And I think that you already alluded to that. So what is
Well, how about this real quick, Joe?
okay?
This is why this happens. It's not because they're small conferences. It's because the Big 12 and Pac 12, their TV deals are much smaller than the Big 10 in the SEC. The problem is with a team like UC or UCF a few years ago, or any of the teams that may have had a shot to get in, is if one of those teams are allowed in, those millions of dollars all goes to that conference, and it gets taken away from the SEC, the Big Ten. And those guys lose money. So the best way to do this is if you want to reward, ESPN wants to reward the guys they give billions and millions of dollars to. Those teams are Big Ten teams and SEC teams. The Pac 12 is on Fox, right?
Right.
The Big 12 is on Fox. The TV deal's not as big. They're trying to reward the guys that bring in all the money to the networks, which is fine, but just call it that then and quit acting like everybody has a chance, because they don't. They simply don't. I mean, if you see, put it like this, if Notre Dame would have lost like 2 or 3 extra games last year, UC's never getting in.
Right. Oh yeah, and I think
we watched UCF have 2 undefeated seasons in a row, and at the end of the first undefeated season, beat an SEC school in the Cotton Bowl, and the next year they go undefeated. They're still not in, and I believe the first year where they didn't get in and they went undefeated, they beat 4 top 25 teams that year.
Yeah, and I really can't run down the list because I can't name them off the top of my head. But since the inception of the college football playoffs system, which I believe was 2014, and I think Ohio State, or I know Ohio State won the first one, but I think that was 2014 if I'm not mistaken. I know for a fact that there have been teams out there that were better than the national championship teams that simply just did not have a shot to compete in that tournament.
We don't know if they were better, but we never can find out. It's just like last year, people say, well, UC got beat 24-6. They didn't even belong. I hate to tell you this, but the UC game was still competitive at the start of the fourth quarter. It was 17-6. Michigan and Georgia, on the other hand, that game was over before the first quarter was over. Nobody right now is saying Michigan doesn't belong in because they got hammered last year. UC lost 24-6. If UC would have went undefeated this year, everybody would have said, well, they had their chance last year. They got hammered. Nobody says that about Michigan. Nobody says that on all the numerous attempts Ohio State and Notre Dame have made and gotten the break speed off of them.
Right. What was it, 2020 or 2019 that Notre Dame went in and got the break speed off of them in the first round?
Notre Dame has been blown out multiple times in the last 6 years. Ohio State's been blown out a few times.
Right. Well, let's look at the upcoming games that we have going in the college play championship weekend. I can't talk today, Mike. So the first game up we have Friday night is Utah, the 11th ranked Utah Utes at USC. What do you think we're going to see in that game, and do you think Utah has a chance to pull this out? Obviously, they already have a win over USC this year.
Yeah, and the bookmakers, I think, right now have USC as just a 2.5-point favorite,
which
tells
correct.
You on a neutral field is 2.5. It'd probably pick them at either place. Maybe USC's favored by 3 at home. But I think what we've seen is I think USC's defense has improved since that first game. They've got Caleb Williams at quarterback, who probably solidified the Heisman last week in his game against Notre Dame. It doesn't get better. I think it's the same thing Carson Palmer did to win the Heisman back in the day, around 2002,
yeah.
Where he basically won the Heisman by a national TV audience, just destroying Notre Dame. And they beat Notre Dame 38-27. I don't know that USC could play with a Georgia, but I know this. If you got a guy like Caleb Williams, he can make plays to win you that game. I think the one thing people overlook here is Utah, talent-wise, is as good as anybody in the country. I mean, Utah's they lost this year at the start of the season to Florida, which is a game they never should have lost. They've got a quarterback named Cameron Rising who played out of his mind against Ohio State in Rose Bowl. He's been in big situations before. I think this is a great matchup. The point spread's 2.5. I think they've got it nailed. I really wouldn't want to give 2.5 points either way in that game, but I would favor USC because I think they're playing for a little bit more. They've got Caleb Williams, but I think this game goes down to the wire. The last game was 43-42. I just actually wrote an article on the Grueling Truth where my prediction was 45-38 USC. So I think USC wins this game. But I think out of these 2 games, this is where we have the best chance of an upset.
Oh, very well. Yeah, as a quasi-Ohio State fan, I do root for Ohio State. I'm looking just because of my fandom for Ohio State to get in. I know that you don't feel that way, but that's just me being selfish.
They just got beat by 22
I know.
points.
I said I'm just being selfish, Mike. I don't think that they deserve to
No,
be
you're
there.
being a little. I mean, I don't want to call you stupid over the air. You're being slow. I mean, because really, they got beat by 22 points.
I know they
And
did.
I think right now, if Ohio State, if Michigan plays Georgia, Georgia's probably going to be favored by 5 or 6 points. So most people don't even think Michigan's the best team. And they went to Ohio State. They imposed their will on them. They physically dominated them. So that tells me if they play a second time, usually a team you can come back like USC, Utah. USC, I think, can come back and win. They didn't get physically dominated by Utah. It was a shootout. When you have a team that comes to your house, is behind at halftime, and then physically runs the ball down your throat with a linebacker, and because their best running back's not there, how do you recover from that? Because you just got physically manhandled by a team. You don't recover from that. And I mean, it's the same thing with Bama. I mean, Bama could have easily lost the Ole Miss game. Bama could easily have 4 or 5 losses. They're not the same team that they were. And I don't see anybody here that could replace either one of these teams. I think right now these are the 4 best teams in the country. And I think people need to leave it alone. I mean, they won't because it gets TV ratings. If you say right now everybody's in, nobody cares.
Right.
But I mean, what happens? I mean, my big question here is what happens if LSU was to beat Georgia? I mean,
Right.
how do you take Georgia or Alabama over an LSU team that just won the SEC?
Yeah, I don't know, and I don't know what the fix of that is, other than to say, well, obviously the playoff change or playoff format is changing in a couple of years. I believe that's 2026 or 2028. I don't remember off the top of my head where they're going to bring 12 teams in, and I don't necessarily like the format how it's set up with Notre Dame unless they join a conference, never being able to get a 1 through 4 seed, but.
Well, they shouldn't be able to. Yeah, because the way this is going, there's only going to be 2 or 3 conferences 5 or 6 years from now. That's the way it's setting up.
Uh,
So Notre Dame needs to get in the conference. I mean, there's no. I mean, they're the only ones. It used to be, you had Notre Dame and basketball, Marquette, DePaul. They weren't in conferences. Football, you had multiple programs that weren't in conferences. And yeah, I mean, hell, you had enough teams that were independents in the mid 80s that could have made a good college football conference. Now it's Notre Dame, and Notre Dame does it strictly for the money. And Notre Dame's eventually going to go to the Big Ten or the SEC because the money to Big Ten and the SEC right now is astronomical. And Notre Dame has already shown now, actually, since they fired Jerry Faust and hired Lou Holtz, they have let everybody realize that they're no different than anybody else.
oh yeah, I mean I can't disagree with anything you're saying. Let's talk about the Kansas State TCU game. What are you looking at in that game, and what would Kansas State have to do to upset TCU? I know the first time that
Um,
they played, I think it was a 38-28 game. I think that was week 7 or 8 of the season. Do you think Kansas State can give TCU a game, or is this game even going to be close?
yeah, I think the game's damn near a toss up. I mean, if you watch the first game, Kansas State led 28-10. And then TCU scores 28 unanswered points. But Kansas State's a really good football team. Both these teams score points. I mean, I don't think it's beyond the realm of comprehension. Both games can be upsets. I just give Utah a little bit better chance. Because if I had to call these games, I think USC Utah is like 51-49 USC, not the score, but percentage of chances to win. I think Kansas State has a 45% chance to win here. I think they have a definite chance to pull this off. They're a very good football team. They played a good schedule. And I mean, if you look at it, same thing. The point spread by the bookies in Vegas, this is considered even a closer matchup than USC Utah because right now what I see
Right.
is TCU's favored by 2. And the thing that's mind blowing is TCU is doing this with a new coach.
Right, and really, I think you know we could talk all day about Georgia, but I think out of the teams in the top four, I think TCU might have played one of the toughest schedules in the top four right now. What's your take on that?
Well, I mean, Michigan's schedule was crap. They beat Ohio State. What was their next best win? Penn
You're
State.
right.
Penn State's overrated. I mean, the Big Ten and the SEC. I know there's a lot of SEC people out there that think they're the greatest conference in the world. But outside of Bama and Georgia, who else does anything? LSU every once in a while. The Big Ten, it's Ohio State or it's Michigan. Penn State every once in a while. The Big 12 is a conference where I mean, TCU, Baylor's always good. Kansas State's good. Hell, Kansas was good this year. TCU have to go. They didn't beat Kansas until late in that game in Kansas. So, really, if you go top to bottom, or at least top to the middle, if you go top 8 teams, I think the Big 12 is as good as any of them. I think they're definitely better than the Big 10. But, we saw with the SEC, they're always overrated. Hell, at one point, Kentucky was ranked 9th.
Right.
And then they lose like 4 games, including getting beat by Vanderbilt. Ole Miss, I think, was a good quality team. LSU is a quality team. But other than that, you got the top 4, you got everybody else. Almost every conference is the same way. The SEC is considered the best because they have Bama and Georgia. The ACC is completely dropped off the map. So it is what it is. And I hate when people say that, by the way, so I want to smack myself. But
well,
I think right now, we've got the best 4 teams. I think what we should do is this. If Kansas State and Utah win, they should get the spots.
Oh, man.
Why not? They won their conference.
I understand that. And, let me give you this.
Forward. Ohio State and Alabama didn't even finish in the top 2.
No, I know. And I think moving forward, and I think that's one of the reasons why, college football is going to move to the format that they're moving to.
And by the way, would
top
either
12
one of those
teams?
teams would either one of those teams have better wins than beating USC twice?
No. No, I don't.
What's Ohio State's best win? They beat Notre Dame.
Right.
Big whoop.
Yeah.
They play this, but USC beat Notre Dame a lot easier than Ohio State did.
Right. I don't think Ohio State's played well this year. I think they set up a schedule to ensure that their only possible loss of the season can come down to the last game of the season against Michigan. I don't think that they do the things that they need to do to maintain their stature as a top program in the country. But, that is my honest opinion of it.
Also, Ohio State people have a very overinflated opinion of their program because Ryan Day is 45-5, and everybody wants him fired.
He lost.
That's kind of moronic.
It is moronic, but you don't lose to Michigan twice, Mike. Tell me about Michigan Purdue. Speaking of Michigan, we got to move on from that.
Michigan will do what they did to Iowa last year. Michigan will beat the hell out of Purdue. I think I could say hell, right? It's a noun because it's a place.
I think so. I think.
Okay.
Hopefully,
I'm just making sure.
Hopefully,
I don't want you to get in trouble.
Yeah. Hopefully the FCC is not too hard.
I don't know. I'm a little excited. I'm feeling a little froggy today, Joe.
Yeah. Well, you're on Froggy talking sports.
I know. That's why I'm feeling froggy.
All right. Last game of playoff weekend. Well, it's not the last game of championship weekend. Georgia LSU.
Georgia gonna beat the heck out of LSU. I don't think those 2 games were even competitive. I think Purdue with the O'Connell kid could be slightly dangerous for Michigan. But my first thought would have been like it was last year when Michigan finally beat Ohio State. They're playing Iowa the next week, and you're thinking, man, it's like the NFL, the trap game. There's got to be a letdown. Because they just played a great game. They beat their big rival. There has to be a letdown. There was no letdown last year. And the reason there wasn't a letdown because Iowa wasn't any good. The one difference this year is, Iowa's good defensively, horrible offensively. But there's a big deal between the Petraeus kid who plays quarterback at Iowa and Aiden O'Connell. O'Connell could go off and keep them in the game. But I think Michigan physically in the second half will pound them and overtake them and beat them by double digits.
Great take. Mike, unfortunately, we are running out of time. I always appreciate
talking. Hey, who won last night? Switzerland County girls or the Milan girls?
Switzerland County, by a bunch.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. But they didn't win the state championship in 1954.
That is correct. I always enjoy talking to you, Mike. Real quick, tell me about what's going on in the Grueling Truth right now.
Nothing right now because I'm on here with you. But you can find, let's see, when are you playing this out? Every week you catch the NFL prediction show with myself, Joe Spilman. Make sure you follow us at Grueling Truth on Twitter. But for all your sports needs, go check out thegruelingtruth.com. And as always, it's been great to be on here with you, Joe.
Thanks, Mike. Like I said, I always have fun talking to you, and I'm sure you'll be back on the show.
The thing that really amazes me is this. If you're watching this, You'll notice that even though I coached Joe when he was in seventh grade, Joe now looks like he probably coached me in seventh grade.
Stop it. And you do bring up a good point. I do want to remind our listeners that if you cannot catch this show live, you can always head over to the Froggy Talking Sports with Ryan and Joe Facebook page and catch these videos live. And we also actually play them out on the Grueling Truth, Mike. So, you can catch us there as well.
They can find that on the YouTube channel for the Grueling Truth.
Yeah, they sure can. Mike.
You can find it on iHeartRadio too, but Joe never takes the time to put the audio version on Spreaker.
Mike, I appreciate you talking with me. Thank you, sir.